Hello and welcome to Thoughts on Therapy. My name is Bryan Stevens and I'm a licensed professional counselor with a practice in Marietta, Georgia, and the founder of TalkForward, who's bringing us this show today. I've been active in behavioral health for over 25 years, and in that time I've met all sorts of knowledgeable people. Thoughts on Therapy is the show to bring their knowledge about therapy and mental wellness to the general public. Today, I'm very excited to have April Oliver with Soar Psychotherapy, who's going to talk to us about trauma and its treatment with a technique called natural processing. So April is a licensed clinical social worker. She graduated with her master's of social work from Georgia State University in 2011 and initially worked to help teens in foster care with building their independent living skills. This included working with teen mothers in foster care on their parenting skills. And April then began working with sex offenders and others seeking treatment for sexually compulsive behaviors while working at the Highland Institute for Behavioral Change. This led to her work at Alana Recovery, working in the area of substance abuse disorders. And it was there during her work there that she was first trained in EMDR, where her focus on trauma work began. After Alana, April moved into private practice full-time and has done work with both Monarch Counseling, a group practice in Kennesaw, and her own practice, Soar Psychotherapy, in Atlanta. Her practice is focused primarily on working with chemical addictions, sexually compulsive behaviors, and trauma. While she uses an eclectic approach, she's has most often focused on combining elements of cognitive behavioral therapy with psychodynamic work along with EMDR. And most recently, she started using natural processing, which I'm so excited to hear more about today. It's a modality developed by Craig Pinner, and it combines elements of somatic experiencing and EMDR. So again, April, thank you for being here today. Excited to have you.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, well, and I have really been looking. I've been looking a lot at trauma. You know, I did a year as executive director for the Atlanta Detox Center, and trauma. You know, just people do not become addicted on substances because they're happy and healthy.
Right. Right.
So we saw quite a lot of that. So I can see how with your specialty, where you're saying I want to do chemical addiction and the trauma work, that those things match up. So I thought what we might start with, since trauma is a significant focus in your practice, if you could talk a little bit about how you conceptualize what trauma is, how do you define it, and how does that look like in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, in addressing trauma from brain and body-based perspectives, I've always framed trauma from this perspective of any event that overwhelms the nervous system that leads to a fight, flight, or freeze response.
Okay.
And this is critical for a lot of clients who don't have a good idea of how their life situations are rooted in changes that their brains and bodies have experienced from trauma. They might be able to say, you know, I feel like these things are happening because of these traumatic experiences, but they don't really understand the physiological changes that have happened because of it. So, you know, because of that, they often internalize it and, you know, am I crazy? What's wrong with me? Why can't I stop having these reactions? And so being able to understand that this, from a physiological perspective, is how trauma changes the body and the brain, that helps them realize, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not losing my mind.
Right.
This is what, you know, trauma does.
It's not a character flaw.
Correct.
There's something, and I do think that we see that a lot. I know in my practice, I'm depressed. Well, being depressed is not a character flaw. There are chemical changes going on in the brain that go with depression. But culturally, we still look at a lot of these things as like sins. The person's just not taking care of themselves. So I love that approach where you're able to give the person some of the biology of what's going on in this important organ in our body, in our brain.
And what is really helpful for a lot of clients, and what I point out to them consistently, is to create that separation. So if something happens and they have a response that really frustrates them, to separate that out. Like, the trauma is creating this response. Some of my clients will even name it, so that they create that separation between what is them and what is the trauma, and it's showing up in their life. So creating that objectivity for themselves, so they realize it's not who they are.
Okay. Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, I would like to, I do definitely want to jump into natural processing, but I now in my introduction noticed that I threw out somatic experiencing and EMDR.
Sure.
So could you talk a little bit about those, and then what natural processing is?
Sure. So, and I'll say, up front, I come from the EMDR side, and so I can talk a little bit about somatic experiencing, but that is not the background I have. So
okay.
EMDR is a brain-based therapy that works on, or it targets how trauma affects the way that experiences get wired in our brain.
Okay.
And the way that gets targeted is with what's called bilateral stimulation. That, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So this huge term, and hence why we call it EMDR. But so the eye movements are a form of bilateral stimulation, and that's just stimuli that occurs in a rhythmic left-right pattern to both sides of the body. So anything that crosses the midline. So you could do tapping. Sometimes clients, will do a butterfly hug. They can tap on their legs. They can tap, with both feet. Just anything, any rhythmic left-right pattern. With EMDR, it creates a calming effect. So it helps clients to withstand some difficult work more readily.
Right.
But it also, without getting into a whole explanation, it also helps rewire the way that trauma gets stored in our brain. So it's targeting that aspect of trauma.
Right.
Somatic experiencing, on the other hand, is body-based. So it's it's looking at trauma from the perspective of how trauma gets stored in the body, how different sensations that we experience are related to traumatic experiences, and going through the reprocessing from that perspective.
Right.
So natural processing then. So natural processing, one, is a process-oriented therapy, meaning that we're following the flow of experience as it occurs moment to moment throughout the session.
Okay.
And how that experience may change as we access information from different channels. So when we're working on a particular experience, we're using the somatic tracking from somatic experiencing, right? Identifying these sensations, following how they move. And then we link that also to the emotions that show up related to it.
Right.
Images that might show up related to it, beliefs that might show up related to the experience. So these different channels that encompass what an experience is for us and how we're holding it. So then the bilateral stimulation from the EMDR comes in to, again, create that calming effect, and then to help with rewiring how the brain is holding a particular issue or experience. So
We're
targeting both things at once.
At the same time. Okay. I really, that, really speaks to me as a therapist, because I've done a lot of work with people, especially us guys who like to live in our heads and aren't quite sure what our feelings are.
Right.
Trying to connect emotions, oh wait, oh, my leg hurts, am I anxious, or some of those feelings. I know that modern, really where we are, and I think a lot of people don't know this, but modern biology is really showing that our nervous system, we kind of think of ourselves as our brain, but really our whole central nervous system is well connected.
Right.
Some of the research on the neurons in our gut, which, by the way, that's where our head was connected before as an embryo. That's where that separation, our brain is right next to our gut.
Right.
So I think that's some really, that sounds very cutting edge. And one thing I do want to kind of talk about just very quickly, people don't always remember this, but the way our brains are separated, we have our two hemispheres, they're connected in the middle. And of course, the right half of our brain controls the left half of our body, and vice versa. And I've seen with the bilateral stimulation, really people being, I had one neurologist once say, well, I'm helping the brain talk to itself. And that experience, the right brain tends to be an experiential brain, and the left brain's our logical brain, and trying to get those two parts of the brains to communicate with each other can help in these situations. So
right.
I love the combination of, we're going to do all this at once.
Well, that's kind of the thing, if you think about the fact that trauma affects, the whole system, the brain and the body, it makes sense to
address everything
at once. Makes sense to me.
Yeah. And I having, treated people with panic attacks and other issues, it's a lot of, let's get into your body and what's going on with your body. And even the fact that, well, you're having a panic attack because your body's revved up and you're looking for some reason to be upset.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, so what kind of, and we may have just answered that question because I see your excitement with it, but what got you interested in getting natural processing training?
Sure. Well, actually, it came largely from, so I had done some EMDR, as a client a couple years ago, and then had been out of therapy, and knew that I needed to get back into therapy, but I felt like I felt sort of intuitively like something was missing. And not that, the EMDR had done some really great things, and, you're not going to get me to say anything bad about it. I mean, I've seen some really amazing things, certainly in clients and then also in my own life. But when I thought about going back to therapy, I just thought, I feel like there's a piece missing. And so then I thought, well, I'll do somatic experiencing and see if that was the missing piece. And then I was procrastinating because during the pandemic and all of that, which arguably should have got me more motivated. But so in the meantime, then I came across this training, and just whatever I saw in the description, I thought, okay, well, that looks, pretty interesting. So I got going on that first before I got back into therapy. And so it just seemed to click, kind of like intuitively. It just felt like, okay, this feels like what I felt like was missing, and it has this aspect from the EMDR that I know has been really effective. And so, I did the training, and I'm like, all right, this feels,
this is for me.
Right. Yeah. So,
well, you feel it, it feels good here. It feels good down in your gut. So there you go.
Exactly. Right. That intuitive thing of like, okay, yep, this is it.
I understand that. And I think it probably fits in well too with some of your psychodynamic approach, because, it all fits together. I don't know, the older I get, the more I go back to some of the more psychodynamic fundamentals, that there's deep processes going on with everybody. Stuff is connected.
Right.
Yeah. I tell my clients, I conceptualize the people as a long, deep river.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And you're at different parts in your life. I even told one client the other day, I said, well, I think what's going on here is you've got some trauma that's in your background, and that's like a big dam. And now you're starting to take some rocks out, and you get flooded with water periodically. And,
Right.
you know, we're
Right.
going to try and control that flood until we can get all that water drained out.
Right. See, I like your metaphors. Metaphors for me, I can get good ones here and there, but I don't come up with them as readily. I like the ones you guys.
Oh, yeah. I tend to think in metaphors, so that's a strength for me. But you know, I'm an avid role player, so I do a lot of role playing games. So
Sure. Oh, see, that's helpful. No, my brain is very straightforward, very logical.
right.
So
So, well, you're using this. I mean, clearly you're excited about it. What sort of progress do you see in clients as you started using this natural processing in your work?
yeah, so some, really exciting things, and the ones that have stuck out are a couple of things. So I have a couple clients who have had some really consistent kind of treatment resistant depressive symptoms, and the EMDR, we would do it and they would make a little bit of progress, but it just seemed like, kind of being stuck with it.
Right.
And so we would start doing this, and in a relatively short period of time, and I would say, 1, 2, 3 sessions of doing some of this, they have acknowledged, identifying a sense of hope that they didn't ever, feel before. They'll say, they'll acknowledge that they feel kind of better day to day. They might have a hard time articulating exactly how, and it's still strange to them and they have a hard time trusting it, of course. But it's there, that can identify that something is shifting. And, on my side as a therapist, the way that they talk about things, I can tell that even if they don't trust it, something is happening. So those examples have been really cool. And then there's another one that has really stood out to me. I have a client that I've worked with for some time, and she's had aphasia for several years due to a medical condition. So, she has a hard time finding the words that she wants to use at times. And so this has affected her self-esteem. It's affected, the way she shows up interpersonally, because
Right.
she get really, she feels like she's being judged for it. And so, it affects her relationship sometimes. And after doing, just a really short bit of natural processing with her, like, she noticed, one, a shift in the aphasia itself, not showing up as much. But I think what's really been cool is not feeling, even if she's in a situation where she feels like maybe somebody is judging her, she doesn't care as much.
Right.
It's this response of like, all right, well, so whatever, that's your problem.
Right.
Like, she just feels really.
Well, and I imagine if we had the way to see it, the changes in her brain, especially with some of the bilateral stimulation, and that she's developed some different pathways around the damage that allows her to have either it's gotten better, or she's got a different relationship with what's happened. Right. So more of that undamaged brain is able to come into play.
Exactly.
And who knows how. I think there's all sorts of things. I'm willing to believe that our brain can talk to itself, not just through the corpus callosum, but down into our toes and back up.
Yeah.
We're just such in the dark ages on understanding how this nervous system works of ours.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing. It's like we get all this information and it's so, brand new and exciting, and we think, okay, this is it, not it, but then it's like, we just keep finding out more and more and more, and it's really cool.
Right. Well, it sounds like then that's going to offer some advantages for the clients and some advantages for you as kind of as a therapist in the therapy process. So yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit more about what you see as those things that work well for natural processing.
Sure. Yeah. So with clients, what I've been hearing, they like the way that it flows better. It's because it's process oriented and moment to moment, it just flows. I mean, you can do the entirety of
Right.
the session with it, whereas with EMDR, they're it's a little bit more, chopped up. So they like the way that it flows better. They feel like, and this, kind of goes back to what I said, but they feel like it's helping them connect dots more quickly, that things just seem to be coming together a little bit more readily than with the standard EMDR. They feel, they specifically said it feels powerful, it feels sustainable. I think one of the things that excites me the most as a therapist is that they really seem to appreciate the control that it feels like it gives them, because you're gaining this awareness of how you operate and how your body operates, and giving space to things that you normally wouldn't have been able to or been willing to or even thought to do. And so they feel like it gives them this capacity to tap into this resilience that they have always had. They just, weren't able to access it because of what was going on. So they just feel really confident.
So much of trauma is a sense of loss of agency.
Yes.
And loss of power. So it sounds like this is great. So this gives me some sense of power and control, at least over my relationship with how I'm feeling.
Yes. Yes. I can slow things down. Something hits me, I can slow it down. I can sit with it. I might not solve, the problem or know exactly what's happening, but I can slow it down enough that I'm not overpowered by it.
Yeah, I talk to my clients about the emotions are going to come up, and I don't think we can suppress them. It's like, are they in the passenger seat or are they in the driver's seat?
Right. Absolutely. They're there. We can't go through life without them. They're useful. They're informative, but you don't have to let them.
And then they're able to then better communicate about what's going on with them to you, because they're not possessed by it. It's right here. Let's talk about it. Where are things going on? And I imagine you're now better able to, as you see kind of physical changes that are going on in session, be able to point those out, and then they're able to acknowledge them. Yeah. It's like, hey, you just relaxed. Did you notice that you just relaxed?
Right. Yeah. That piece of the somatic tracking where, I'm helping them piece together some dots because I see things, I relay that to them. And so they're just gaining all of this awareness that they just never had before. And it's really powerful for them.
Getting to know more of what's going on deep in that river.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I think we with trauma, there's so much suppression of the negative, it's all this negative stuff. And people, I always say to people, well, I wished I hadn't have done this. So you did whatever you needed to do to survive.
Right.
You're here.
Yes.
Now you've got the opportunity to do something else.
Yeah. And that's as far as a foundational piece of natural processing, Craig Penner talks about a lot of, these symptoms that end up coming up as, diagnoses, either mental health or, physical diagnoses or medical diagnoses. We have this drive to completion, this inherent drive to completion, right? Our body and brains are built towards healing. That's what they want to do. But we also have this drive for survival, meaning that when we are in traumatic situations, our body does what it needs to do in order to survive. And, so those things can end up at odds with each other. And so we walk around with these internal dilemmas of, I want to do better, I want to be better, but my body's operating this way because I had to survive. And then it shows up in all these crazy ways. And that's where this work comes in, of
Right.
giving space for those dilemmas to work themselves out.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just thinking this natural processing sounds like it'd be great for not just people with identified, big T trauma, but anybody who's stuck with, I did X, Y, and Z to survive. I think all of us, we survived childhood. We get out of childhood, we're wounded in some way, maybe not severely. Some of us are more wounded than others.
Right.
But this sense I see is a theme in clients over and over again, this sense of, well, do you want to just spend the rest of your life in survival mode?
Right.
Or do you want to move into this completion thrive mode?
Right. Right.
And you're not 8 anymore, so now you can make a decision, right? Or you're not this, from a big T trauma, you're not in this traumatic experiences in the past, you survived.
Right. Yeah.
How can we get unstuck? Well, what are some of the ways you've noticed doing this work, like it's affected, on it virtually, right? So, because teletherapy's gotten big.
Right.
Yeah. And this to me seems like, as a therapist, man, I want to be right there in the room with them. So what have you discovered trying to do this, like we're doing now?
Right. Yeah. Doing it virtually. So a couple of things. I've not noticed, any yet. I mean, I have limited data on this so far. Some of these really big shifts have happened with clients I've only seen, virtually. If I have a client who does it in person, they often tend to want to keep doing it that way. But virtually seems to work. The only thing really is, because I can only see so much, it's more on either me to ask more questions or the client to report more about what's happening, typically the lower half of the body, because I just can't see that. But I've done some really great work virtually, so I can't say as though I think that there's a massive difference in the possibilities that exist. I think client preference plays a big part.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, I know I've struggled with some of the virtual. I can see somebody's face, but I can't see what their legs are doing. And I've had clients, with just their legs just jiggling, and I'm like, well, I have no idea if they're doing that or not when you're
right.
And unless they're doing it so bad their whole body is going. I could, you can notice.
Right, you can pick up on some of the movements. Yeah, if the shoulders move or something. Sure.
Yeah, and I find I do a lot of trying to read the person, and as they're talking, like, well, wait a minute, let's go back to something. You look sad there. Tell me about that.
Right.
And how often I wasn't sad. Well, your body sure showed that you were sad. So, I wonder about that.
Yeah.
Well, that's really kind of, I like that. This sounds really fascinating. I mean, you may have stimulated me to go do some more continuing education training. I've always been a little bit, I'm very free flowing in my sessions. So I've always been a little bit concerned about the structure of EMDR. But so I like kind of this, you talked about how the clients like in the moment of the natural processing. That sounds very appealing to me.
Yeah. Well, and that, we were talking about advantages, and, we talked about with the clients. From my perspective, that's been one of the big advantages, is that there's a lot less work on me cognitively, right? All I'm doing is following what's happening with you. I don't have to sit there and, all therapists have had those moments where something's happening, you're like, I don't know where I'm going to go with this. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to get this client unstuck. And certainly we have limited responsibility in that, of course, but you know, and there's all these different techniques to pull from. And with this, it's like, I don't need any of that.
You're being present with the client.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's where I want to be. It's I don't want to always be thinking about this technique or that technique. It's I'm with you. You tell me what's going on. We're going to figure this out together.
Yeah.
So I know, very, very old fashioned of me. Don't tell my insurance companies.
I'm with you. No, I love being an insurance company. We're not done.
So one of the things that we see with people with trauma, especially, I think, a lot of people with trauma know they need help, but they can be very reluctant when it comes. That's kind of a population very reluctant to go to therapy. They don't want to feel like they're going to relive their trauma. I don't want to talk to people about, I've been there on intake. Well, I already told somebody about everything. It's fine. You don't have to repeat it for me,
Right.
So what might you say to those people, who are hesitant to begin therapy, and get engaged?
I think one of the biggest things I would say is that, if you even have enough hope that you're considering therapy, that's enough. If you show up and do the work consistently, there is no way to not make progress. It will happen. And, I have clients who, maybe they're going through a rough time, or they're just feeling discouraged about their progress. And what I'll do is, I'll say, okay, well, how were you doing 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago? Or how would you have handled this, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago? And every time they're able to recognize, okay, I would not have been able to handle this well, those different intervals, I would, inevitably they identify progress that they're making. And so, just that tool of, let's look at the big picture. You're stuck here right now in this moment or this thing, and you're feeling stuck. Look at the big picture and you'll see the progress that's there.
Right.
So I don't know. I think that's really one of the things I like.
If you're thinking about it, go for it.
Yeah. And you don't have to believe in it. You don't have to, any of it. Show up, do it, be curious, and progress will happen.
And I think one of the things I've seen with people with trauma, seems almost invariably when the person who's had some traumatic experience starts to think, maybe I need to get some help on this. It seems invariably because something has changed in their brain and their body, that they're now ready to take care of it. That stuff has come up. I just have not seen people who have that urge to go take care of it, and they're generally not ready.
Right. Absolutely. That's the thing. Once you have that little, thing that gets you thinking about it, that's enough. Okay.
All right. So I'm coming to therapy. I want to come to therapy. I'm not sure it's going to work or not. What would you say that, for the average person, because I know what we do, what people think we're putting folks on couches and whatnot. So, and again, I think, you're specializing, and I really feel like in a population that's got kind of that high degree of reluctance.
Sure.
What would you like them to know, kind of when it comes to therapy, and then maybe, how would they get the most out of working with somebody like you in therapy?
When we think about just kind of the thing that I would like the general public to know, and I think that this is shifting, and certainly if anything has done it, the pandemic has done it. Everyone can benefit at some point in their lives. It doesn't have to be these major things that go on. Everybody goes through something in their life, or everybody has something that they, communication skills, or maybe communication skills in a particular, aspect of your life. But everyone can benefit at some point, in their life. It doesn't just, you don't have to wait until some, crisis
Right.
happens. And like I said, the pandemic, I think, has made that, evident to a lot of people. And certainly the pandemic has, been a significant crisis. But even, I've seen people that are really well adjusted during the pandemic and meant like, okay, I've had some issues with some depression and anxiety. Right. And
well, I think I was as being somebody who has his own anxiety and tends to be a fretter and a worrier, and talking to a fellow therapist who was also a bit of a fretter and worrier, it dawned on both of us that about, I don't know, April, May of last year, we were over worrying about the pandemic. And we were seeing a bunch of people who were not fretters, just being collapsed by anxiety. I kind of joked. I said, well, they're amateurs. We're professionals that worry.
Right.
And that's like, oh, this is something to worry about. Okay, well, I need something to worry about. I'll just fit it into this box and go on. Now, we've both done our own work with our own therapists on how to cope and manage our anxiety. And so to your point, I think folks out there, most of the therapists you're going to see have done their own therapy.
Right. And if they have not, I wonder.
Yeah. Well, we all, each of us has our own stuff. Like I said, we all get wounded in childhood. Yeah, I kind of agree. I think we all have can benefit from it. And I think a lot of people out there definitely I could live, I guess, more authentic. I'm now going to sound like a flower child here, but more authentic, more self-actualized lives.
Absolutely.
With therapy. And yeah, I think that's really good. Unfortunately, there's not enough of us to go around. So.
Yeah, I know. Right. If only. I think that people settle in their lives for good enough in a lot of ways. And so therapy, like you said, would just bring in that, self-actualization piece of really being able to, kick things up a notch and not just live a so-so or a good enough life. Yeah. So
well, it's like Shawshank Redemption, get busy living or get busy dying.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And so, yeah, I think everyone could benefit, and then about, getting the most out of working with me, I would say, well, a couple of things. One, consistency, I mentioned that before, but that is a piece of it. If you're showing up once and then not for a couple of weeks and then once and then not for a month, that's some limited progress you're going to be able to make. And then I would really say the other piece of it is, one of my big goals for my clients, of course, I think like a lot of therapists, is we want our clients to take full responsibility for their life and how they show up. And so that starts with taking some of that responsibility for this session as well.
Right.
Right. I can guide a whole session. I can guide a whole course of treatment. That's not the most enjoyable for me or meaningful for you. I think, and of course there's certain situations, crisis situations and things like that, right? I mean, I'm not talking about moments that require more directiveness, but, I am not a dentist. I don't love pulling teeth. I don't know many therapists who do. So, taking some responsibility for, what you want out of work.
And we don't really write prescriptions, even in a metaphorical sense. This is a client I get, well, what should I do? I don't know. Is you're full of should. I'm not going to add to that. Yeah. That's not my job. My job is to help you take all that should and examine the shoulds and keep the one you want and not the one you want. So yeah, it's a different, I definitely agree with that. It's like, come prepared to do the work.
Yeah.
And you're paying for it. So you might as well, I figure you're paying for the time, you ought to come in and do the work.
Right. Yeah. It's, I want to make it useful for you. And certainly you want it to be a good use of your time and money and resources. So taking, that responsibility. So, yeah, taking responsibility and then, just consistency. And with those two things, progress is absolutely inevitable.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds a lot like self-parenting. Being consistent and showing myself I care.
Yeah.
Well, I am really, you got me pretty excited about this natural processing. I'm gonna have to put some more research into it. And I will put your information, the links, so folks, links below.
Sure.
And again, we've been talking today with April Oliver with Soar Psychotherapy in Atlanta. And if thoughts on therapy is is content that you like, I certainly encourage you to like the content, subscribe, share it with anybody that you think would be good to share it with. And as we come out with these, certainly if you click the notification bell, then you'll get to see notifications when we come out with these new things. So again, I'm Bryan Stevens with TalkForward for Thoughts on Therapy. And April, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love talking shop, so I enjoyed it very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much.